Have you ever wondered just how weird royalty could be? Did you know that some medieval monarchs were so bizarre they made today's celebrities look totally normal? Number 10. Charles VI of France, the Mad King. Ever been so convinced you were made of glass that you refused to let people touch you? Well, Charles VI of France did exactly that. In 1392, this once capable king suffered his first episode of what historians now believe was severe mental illness. During these episodes, Charles would run wildly through his palace until exhausted, sometimes not recognizing his wife or children. But here's the truly wild part. Charles developed a bizarre delusion that he was made of glass. He ordered his tailors to reinforce his clothing with iron rods, so he wouldn't break if someone touched him. He refused to bathe, change clothes, or even move sometimes for months. Court officials had to play along, treating him as fragile as he believed himself to be. Despite his mental state, Charles ruled France for 42 years, though power gradually shifted to rival nobles during his episodes. When he was lucid, he was actually quite effective, earning the nickname Charles the Beloved early in his reign. But his unpredictable behavior led to political chaos, with English forces taking advantage of the unstable French leadership during the 100 Years' War. The Battle of Agincourt in 1415 was a devastating loss for France that happened largely because of the power vacuum created by Charles's condition. Perhaps most tragically, Charles's illness was passed down to his grandson, Henry VI of England, who suffered similar mental health crises. The glass delusion itself became somewhat contagious among European nobility, with several aristocrats in the following centuries claiming they too were made of fragile glass. Number 9. Ibrahim I of the Ottoman Empire, Ibrahim the Crazy. What would you do if you spent your formative years locked in a cage? Ibrahim I spent his first 22 years imprisoned in the famous cage of the Ottoman palace, expecting execution any day. When his brother Sultan Murad IV died in 1640, Ibrahim was the only surviving male heir, so they dragged him to the throne, where he reportedly refused to believe his brother was actually dead until he saw the corpse. Once Ibrahim realized he was truly Sultan, he went wild with his newfound freedom. He developed bizarre obsessions, particularly with obese women. Ibrahim sent his agents throughout the empire, searching for the fattest woman they could find. They eventually discovered an Armenian woman weighing over 330 pounds, whom Ibrahim made his favorite concubine, giving her the name Sugar Cubit. Ibrahim's palace became infamous for wild orgies and strange behaviors. He once had all 280 women in his harem drowned in the Bosphorus Strait after hearing a rumor one had been unfaithful. He developed a strange fixation with fur, decorating his chambers with sables and filling the palace fountains with rose oil. Ibrahim ordered his Grand Vizier to find the most beautiful women in the empire, regardless of whether they were already married. His excessive spending nearly bankrupted the treasury. When the citizens of Constantinople finally rebelled against his rule, Ibrahim was dethroned and executed after just 8 years as Sultan. The strange behaviors that defined his reign are often attributed to the trauma of his imprisoned youth, though some historians suggest he may have suffered from untreated mental illness. Number 8. Christina of Sweden, the Queen Who Abdicated. Would you give up a throne just to be yourself? Queen Christina did exactly that. Born in 1626, Christina became Queen of Sweden at age 6 after her father died in the 30 Years' War. From childhood, she refused to conform to expectations for women of her era. She preferred men's clothing, rejected marriage, and developed passionate interests in philosophy, astronomy, and alchemy. Christina shocked her court by demanding education typically reserved for men. She invited famous philosophers like René Descartes to her court, who reportedly died after giving the Queen philosophy lessons at 5 a.m. in her freezing library. She slept only 5 hours a night, rode horses like a man rather than side saddle, and had little interest in her appearance, often wearing dirty, mismatched clothes. The Swedish court was scandalized by Christina's behavior, which included a close relationship with a lady-in-waiting that many believed was romantic. When pressure mounted for her to marry and produce an heir, Christina made an unprecedented decision. She abdicated the throne in 1654, converted to Catholicism despite ruling Protestant Sweden, and moved to Rome. In Rome, Christina continued her eccentric lifestyle. She established a scientific academy, collected art and manuscripts, protected Jewish communities, and tried to launch expeditions to conquer Naples. She dressed in men's clothing, swore prolifically, and spoke 8 languages. The Pope and cardinals weren't quite sure what to make of the former queen, who rode through Rome, dressed as a man and openly criticized Vatican politics. Christina's gender expression and refusal to marry have led some modern historians to suggest she may have been intersex, lesbian, or non-binary by today's terminology. She wrote extensively about her distaste for marriage and traditional gender roles, stating, "I am certainly not of the common sex. I was neither man nor woman, but of a third sex altogether." Number 7. Vlad III, the Impaler of Wallachia. Did you know the real Dracula was actually worse than the vampire legend? Vlad III ruled Wallachia, part of modern Romania, for just 6 years across 3 different reigns, but his methods of punishment were so ghastly they inspired Bram Stoker's famous vampire character centuries later. Vlad earned his nickname, the Impaler, for his favorite method of execution. He had victims placed on wooden stakes, positioned to ensure they wouldn't die immediately, but would instead suffer for hours or days as the stakes slowly impaled them. Historical accounts suggest he once had 20,000 Ottoman prisoners impaled around his capital city, creating a forest of dying men that reportedly made an invading Ottoman sultan turn back in horror. What makes Vlad truly eccentric wasn't just his cruelty, but his strange sense of justice. He once invited hundreds of nobles to a feast, then had them all impaled for perceived disloyalty. He enforced bizarre moral codes. Merchants who sold poor quality goods were impaled alongside their products. When the Ottoman Sultan demanded tribute, Vlad nailed Turkish envoys' turbans to their heads when they refused to remove them in his presence. Vlad reportedly enjoyed dining among his impaled victims, sometimes dipping bread in their blood. He would force wives to eat their husbands' flesh and had people flayed, boiled, decapitated, and blinded for various offenses. Yet to some Romanians, Vlad remains a folk hero who defended his land against Ottoman expansion and created harsh but effective justice that eliminated crime. Perhaps Vlad's most unusual eccentricity was his absolute commitment to honesty. He placed a valuable gold cup at a public fountain, and no one dared steal it during his reign. When visiting merchants complained about thieves, he invited them to count their money. Finding they had more than they claimed, he had them impaled for dishonesty. Number 6. Emperor Norton I of the United States. Can you declare yourself emperor of a country and have people actually accept it? Joshua Norton did, though not technically a medieval monarch. He lived in 19th century San Francisco. Emperor Norton deserves mention as perhaps the most eccentric royal in American history. After losing his fortune in a bad rice investment in 1859, businessman Joshua Norton suffered some kind of mental break. He disappeared for a while, then reappeared with a proclamation published in a local newspaper. At the peremptory request of a large majority of the citizens of these United States, I, Joshua Norton, declare and proclaim myself Emperor of these United States. the truly remarkable thing, San Francisco basically went along with it. For 21 years, Norton roamed San Francisco wearing a blue uniform with gold epaulets, a beaver hat adorned with feathers and rosettes, and carrying a sword. He inspected sidewalks, rode free on public transportation, ate at restaurants that displayed plaques announcing by appointment to His Majesty, Emperor Norton I, and issued his own currency that local businesses actually accepted. Norton made proclamations abolishing Congress, ordering bridges built across San Francisco Bay, eventually realized as the Bay Bridge, and forbidding the use of the word Frisco for San Francisco. When police once arrested him to commit him to an asylum, the public outcry was so great that he was promptly released with a formal apology. When Emperor Norton died in 1880, over 30,000 people attended his funeral. The San Francisco Chronicle's obituary read, "Norton I, by the grace of God, Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, departed this life." Though clearly suffering from delusions, Norton was beloved for his gentle nature and dignity, and for embodying the eccentric, independent spirit of San Francisco itself. Number 5. Joanna of Castile. Joanna the Mad. Would you travel for months across Spain with your husband's corpse? Joanna of Castile did. Born in 1479 as the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the same monarchs who sponsored Columbus, Joanna was never expected to rule. However, when her siblings and their children died unexpectedly, she became heir to the Spanish throne. Joanna had married Philip the Handsome of Burgundy in 1496. She was apparently so obsessively in love with her husband that she became pathologically jealous, flying into rages when he paid attention to other women, which he frequently did. After Philip died suddenly in 1506, Joanna refused to be separated from his body. She had his coffin opened multiple times to kiss and caress his corpse. For months, Joanna traveled across Spain with Philip's decomposing remains, only opening the casket at night because she'd heard that dead bodies couldn't be viewed in daylight. She allegedly slept near his open coffin. When she learned that a beautiful woman had paid respects to Philip's body, she had the coffin opened to check whether the woman had stolen a kiss from her dead husband. Joanna's father, Ferdinand, used her grief and increasingly erratic behavior as an excuse to have her declared mentally incompetent. He imprisoned her in Tordesillas Castle, where she remained for nearly 50 years, long after her father's death. Her son, the future Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, continued her confinement. Modern historians debate whether Joanna was truly mentally ill or simply the victim of political machinations by her father and son. Some suggest she may have suffered from schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, while others argue her madness was dramatized or even invented to prevent a woman from ruling Spain. Number 4. Ludwig II of Bavaria. The Fairy Tale King. Have you ever wanted to live in a fairy tale? King Ludwig II of Bavaria spent his country's treasury trying to make that dream come true. Ascending to the throne in 1864, at just 18 years old, Ludwig quickly showed more interest in fantasy than politics. Ludwig built a series of elaborate castles that nearly bankrupted Bavaria. The most famous, Neuschwanstein, looks like it jumped straight from a fairy tale, and later inspired Disney's Sleeping Beauty Castle. Ludwig designed these castles not as functional royal residences, but as fantasy retreats where he could escape reality. Neuschwanstein featured artificial caves, a throne room inspired by Byzantine churches, and technological marvels like running water, central heating, and even telephones, all in a medieval-style castle. An obsessive fan of composer Richard Wagner, Ludwig spent enormous sums funding his operas and built another castle, Linderhof, with an artificial underground grotto where he would sit in a swan-shaped boat while musicians played Wagner's composition. He often dined alone, talking to imaginary guests like Louis XV and Marie Antoinette, and had elaborate meals served to empty chairs while he watched. As Ludwig retreated further into fantasy, he began sleeping during the day and riding through the countryside at night in an elaborate sleigh. He avoided public appearances and state business, preferring to plan more castles. Eventually, his ministers, concerned about the state's finances and Ludwig's mental health, had him declared insane and deposed in 1886. Just 3 days after being removed from power, Ludwig died under mysterious circumstances in Lake Starnberg alongside his psychiatrist. The official ruling was suicide by drowning, but many believe he was murdered. Despite being declared mad and nearly bankrupting Bavaria, Ludwig is now one of the region's most beloved historical figures, as his fantasy castles draw millions of tourists each year. Number 3. Eric XIV of Sweden, the paranoid king. What happens when a brilliant but unstable mind gains absolute power? Eric XIV of Sweden, who ruled from 1560 to 1568, provides a disturbing answer. Initially considered a talented Renaissance prince, skilled in mathematics, astronomy, astrology, and diplomacy, Eric's reign descended into paranoia and violence. Eric began his reign with promising reforms, expanding trade and establishing Sweden's first standing military. But he soon displayed signs of mental instability. He proposed marriage to several European royal women, including Elizabeth I of England, but these negotiations invariably collapsed due to Eric's increasingly bizarre behavior. Eric's paranoia intensified when he became convinced that Swedish nobility, particularly the powerful Stur family, was plotting against him. In 1567, during what is known as the Stur murders, Eric personally stabbed nobleman Niels Stur in prison and ordered the execution of several other aristocrats. After the killings, Eric disappeared for 3 days, later found wandering the countryside dressed as a peasant. Following this episode, Eric's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He appointed his peasant mistress, Karin Mansdotter, as queen, scandalizing the nobility. He became obsessed with identifying traitors, surrounding himself with bodyguards and consulting astrologers about potential threats. He would swing between periods of lucidity where he effectively managed state affairs and violent episodes where he attacked his advisors. Modern medical historians suggest Eric likely suffered from schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, possibly exacerbated by poisoning. Analysis of his remains in 2014 found high levels of arsenic in his body, supporting the historical account that his brother Johann, who eventually deposed him, had Eric poisoned with arsenic-laced pea soup during his 9-year imprisonment after losing the throne. Number 2. Emperor Caligula of Rome. Can absolute power corrupt absolutely? Caligula's brief reign suggests the answer is yes. While technically from ancient Rome rather than medieval times, Caligula's legendary eccentricities set a standard for royal madness that later monarchs would struggle to match. Caligula, born Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus in 12 CE, became emperor in 37 CE to great public acclaim. For the first 6 months of his reign, he was a moderate and popular ruler. Then something changed dramatically. Perhaps an illness, perhaps the realization that his power was truly absolute. Caligula's eccentricity manifested in numerous ways. He allegedly appointed his favorite horse, Incitus, to the Roman Senate, providing the animal with a marble stable, ivory manger, purple blankets, and a staff of servants. He built a temporary floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae, over 3 miles long, just so he could ride across it to disprove a prophecy that he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. His spending habits were extraordinary. He exhausted the imperial treasury on elaborate games, racing events, and public spectacles. He built ships with jewel-encrusted sails and pearl prows for his personal pleasure. When funds ran low, he began falsely accusing wealthy citizens of crimes so he could seize their assets. Caligula proclaimed himself a living god, ordering temples built in his honor and having statues of himself placed in religious sites. He appeared in public dressed as various deities, including Venus, Diana, and Hercules. He allegedly engaged in incestuous relationships with his sisters and would bring other men's wives to his private quarters during banquets, then comment on their performance when he returned. After just 4 years of increasingly unstable and cruel rule, Caligula was assassinated by his own Praetorian Guard in 41 CE. While some historians debate the accuracy of accounts of his madness, suggesting they were exaggerated by later Roman writers, there's enough consistency in the historical record to suggest Caligula's behavior was truly bizarre, even by the standards of Roman emperors. Number 1. Charles II of Spain, the Bewitched. What happens when centuries of royal inbreeding finally catch up with a dynasty? Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg monarch of Spain, provides the tragic answer. Born in 1661, Charles was the product of generations of Habsburg intermarriage. His family tree was so convoluted that his parents, Philip IV and Mariana of Austria, were uncle and niece, while also being more closely related through multiple other family connections. Genetic analysis suggests Charles's genome had almost as much inbreeding as would occur in the offspring of a brother-sister pairing. The physical results were catastrophic. Charles was described as having an enormous misshapen head, a protruding jaw so severe he couldn't chew properly, and a tongue too large for his mouth, making speech difficult. He didn't walk until age 8 or talk until age 4. Contemporary accounts described him as short, weak, and rather sickly, with a very prominent jaw, a pale complexion, brown hair, and features recognizable as Habsburg, but exaggerated to the point of caricature. Despite his physical and intellectual challenges, Charles was king of the largest empire in the world, though real power rested with his mother and advisors. Charles's eccentricities were numerous. He was reportedly unable to feed himself due to his jaw deformity. He suffered frequent hallucinations and confessed imaginary sins. He would crawl around on all fours, howling like a wolf at certain phases of the moon. Charles believed he was constantly under attack from witches and demons. His confession records show him frequently admitting to being bewitched, leading to his nickname El Hekitai, the Bewitched. When his first wife died, an exorcism was performed on Charles because it was believed he was possessed. Perhaps most tragically, Charles was obsessed with his inability to produce an heir. He married twice, but fathered no children, likely due to genetic issues that made him infertile. As he aged, his physical and mental health deteriorated further. Before his death, at just 38, the succession crisis looming over the childless Charles led to the War of Spanish Succession, which reshaped European politics. When Charles died in 1700, the autopsy reportedly found his heart was the size of a peppercorn, his lungs corroded, his intestines rotten, and he had a single testicle black as coal, and his head was full of water. With Charles, the Spanish Habsburg dynasty ended not with glory, but with perhaps the most physically and mentally unfortunate monarch in European history. Are royal eccentricities simply the result of unchecked power, or did these strange behaviors stem from untreated mental and physical conditions that might be easily diagnosed today? And what might the world look like if these eccentric rulers had received the medical and psychological care they so clearly needed?